He thinks he's invisible. For 13 months, Yahya Sinwar has moved through Gaza like smoke, sleeping in different tunnels, never using phones, trusting only his inner circle. What he doesn't know is that invisibility has a pattern, and patterns can be mapped. Right now, 3,000 miles away, an algorithm is counting his breaths. He thinks he's invisible. For 13 months, Yahya Sinwar has moved through Gaza like smoke, sleeping in different tunnels, never using phones, trusting only his inner circle. What he doesn't know is that invisibility has a pattern, and patterns can be mapped. Right now, 3,000 miles away, an algorithm is counting his breaths. October 16th, 2024. Late afternoon in Rafah. The sun bleeds orange through dust clouds thick enough to choke on. Sinwar walks through the ruins of what used to be a residential block. He's wearing civilian clothes, dusty pants, a faded jacket. Nothing that would mark him as the man who orchestrated the deadliest attack in Israeli history. Around him, other survivors pick through rubble. A woman searching for photographs. An old man stacking bricks. Normal people doing normal things in an abnormal hell. What they don't know is that every movement in this area is being recorded, not by one satellite, by 6, thermal imaging, infrared, standard visual, ground-penetrating radar mapping tunnel networks below, cell tower triangulation, tracking every active phone within 2 kilometers, facial recognition and software analyzing every person who emerged from the ground in the past 72 hours. Sinwar doesn't carry a phone. He knows better. What he doesn't know is that the people around him do. And every phone is a beacon. Every call creates a network map. Every text message draws another connection line on screens in Tel Aviv. He's been running for 378 days. The hunt began on October 7th, 2023 at 6:29 a.m. That was when the first rocket crossed the border fence. By 6:43, Hamas fighters on, paragliders were landing in Israeli towns. By 7:15, the music festival at Re'im had become a killing field. By noon, more than 1,000 Israelis were dead or dying. By sunset, 240 people had been dragged into Gaza as hostages. Yahya Sinwar wasn't on any battlefield that day. He was deep underground, watching it unfold on delayed video feeds. He had planned this for years, rehearsed it in secret compounds, built the tunnels specifically to move fighters undetected, stockpiled weapons in mosques and schools and hospitals, calculated every angle. But there was one calculation he missed. He assumed Israel would respond with conventional war, tanks, airstrikes, ground invasions. He assumed it would be loud and public and political. What he didn't account for was the quiet machinery that started turning before the last body was cold. Inside a secure facility outside Tel Aviv, a room full of analysts began building a file. Every known associate of Sinwar, every place he'd ever been, photographed. Every pattern from his 2 decades in Israeli prisons. The way he walked, the way he gestured when he spoke, his preference for moving at night, his distrust of technology, his habit of using children and civilians as human shields. They mapped his family, his friends, his couriers, people he trusted, people who feared him. They cross-referenced prison records, interrogation transcripts, audio from old wiretaps, footage from security cameras in cities he'd visited years ago. They built a psychological profile down to the smallest detail, what foods he preferred, what injuries he carried from prison beatings, how he reacted to stress. Then they waited. Because killing Yahya Sinwar wasn't the hard part. Finding him was, and killing him without causing a regional war. That was the impossible part. 3 weeks after October 7th, Israeli ground forces entered Gaza. The official mission: destroy Hamas infrastructure, rescue hostages. The unofficial mission: flush Sinwar out of the tunnels. Make him move. Because movement creates intelligence, and intelligence creates opportunity. What Sinwar couldn't see was the network tightening around him. Every tunnel mapped, every safe house marked, every courier identified and tracked. Mossad wasn't just watching Gaza. They were watching Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Qatar, anywhere a Hamas commander might run. They had facial recognition running at border crossings, voice analysis on intercepted calls, informants reporting movements in real time. But Sinwar didn't run to another country. He went deeper into Gaza, into the tunnel system Hamas had spent billions building, 300 miles of underground passages, some wide enough to drive vehicles through, others barely large enough to crawl. Command centers, weapons depots, living quarters, all hidden beneath schools and hospitals and apartment buildings. Israeli forces found the tunnels, mapped them, pumped some full of seawater, bombed the entrances. But Sinwar kept moving, kept disappearing, kept sending out recorded messages to prove he was still alive. In April 2024, Israel killed 3 of his top commanders in a targeted strike. Sinwar's brother-in-law, his head of security, the man who coordinated weapons smuggling, all dead in one operation. Intelligence suggested Sinwar had been in the same building hours earlier. He sent out another audio message 2 days later, defiant, promising more attacks, saying Israel could never reach him. What he didn't know was that every message gave Mossad more data, voice stress analysis, background sounds, acoustic signatures that could narrow down his location. They analyzed the reverb, the echo patterns, estimated ceiling height and wall material, cross-referenced it with tunnel maps. By June, they had narrowed his probable location to a 6-square-kilometer area in southern Gaza. Still too large for a conventional strike. Still too many civilians. Still too much risk of killing him without confirmation. Then in July, something changed. A courier was captured, not by Israeli forces, by a Hamas rival faction in an internal dispute. Before anyone realized the man's importance, he was interrogated, tortured. He broke and gave up information, not about Sinwar directly, about his routine, his security protocols, the way messages were passed. That information made its way to Mossad through back channels. Palestinian intermediaries, people with their own reasons to want Sinwar gone. People who understood that, as long as he lived, the war would continue, and the war was destroying Gaza. The courier revealed something crucial. Sinwar moved every 3 days, never the same pattern, never the same route, but always within a specific radius, always with at least 2 bodyguards, always checking 3 different exits before entering any space. Mossad built a new model, fed it everything they knew, movement patterns, tunnel locations, safe houses, courier routes. The algorithm predicted where he would be on any given day with 60% accuracy. 60% wasn't good enough. Not when the cost of failure was international condemnation, not when one missed strike could kill dozens of civilians and give Sinwar a propaganda victory. They needed certainty. They needed eyes on target. They needed someone inside the circle. By August, they had 3 people reporting back, not agents, not trained spies, civilians, Palestinians, people who had lost family in Hamas crackdowns, people who saw the October 7th attack as a death sentence for Gaza, people who wanted Sinwar gone for their own reasons. These people didn't meet with Mossad officers. They never saw an Israeli face. They communicated through encrypted apps routed through proxies in Europe. They used codes, passed information hidden in market transactions, built layers of deniability that would protect them if they were discovered. One of them worked in food distribution. He noticed which buildings received supplies at odd hours, which routes the trucks took, which areas had extra security. Another worked in medical services. He tracked which clinics treated certain types of injuries, gunshot wounds from training accidents, infections from tunnel conditions, burns from weapons handling. The third was a driver, not for Hamas, for civilians. But sometimes Hamas commanders needed civilian transport. And when they did, they paid well and threatened worse if you talked. None of these 3 knew about the others. Each reported fragments, small details, pieces of a puzzle they couldn't see. But Mossad saw it, connected the dots, built the picture. By September, their probability model hit 78% accuracy. They could predict Sinwar's location within 48 hours, sometimes 24, still not good enough. They needed real-time confirmation. They needed him in the open. They needed a kill zone with minimal collateral damage. The problem was simple. Sinwar knew how targeted killings worked. He'd studied Israeli operations for decades. He knew about drones, about precision missiles, about how intelligence services track targets. So he moved like a ghost. Never the same place twice. Never predictable. Always surrounded by civilians. He made a calculation. If Israel killed him, along with dozens of civilians, the international backlash would be devastating. The US would have to distance itself. European allies would condemn it. The war would become unsustainable politically. What he didn't calculate was patience. Mossad wasn't in a hurry. They could wait. They could watch. They could let him think he'd won. By late September, the surveillance net was complete. Satellite coverage updated every 90 minutes. Thermal imaging constant. Ground intelligence reporting daily. Algorithms processing terabytes of data. Facial recognition running on every camera feed within 20 kilometers. And then, on October 12th, one of the informants sent a message. Simple. Just a photo of graffiti on a wall. Fresh paint, Hamas slogans. Specific tunnel network symbols known only to senior commanders. Analysts ran the photo through geolocation software. Cross-referenced the symbols. Checked recent activity in that area. The algorithm's confidence score jumped to 91%. Sinwar was close, very close, probably within 500 meters of that wall. On October 14th, thermal imaging picked up unusual movement. 3 heat signatures entering a tunnel entrance at 2 a.m. Pattern matched Sinwar's security profile. The algorithm flagged it. Analysts watched. The signatures disappeared underground. Standard. But this time, they didn't re-emerge at the usual exit points. Mossad scrambled ground-penetrating radar, tracked the movement through the tunnels, watched them stop, stay in one location for 6 hours, then move again. On October 15th, one of the signatures emerged above ground, alone, walked to a market, bought food, returned to the tunnel. The facial recognition flagged him. Not Sinwar, a bodyguard. Known associate, always traveled with Sinwar. The pieces clicked into place. He was here, in this specific network, probably in one of 3 structures above ground that connected to the tunnels below. Intelligence analysts presented the case to commanders. Confidence level, 89%. Collateral risk, moderate. International blowback, manageable if the strike was precise and evidence was clear. The operation was authorized, but with conditions. Absolute confirmation required. Visual identification of Sinwar himself. No strike unless civilian presence was minimal. No strike unless escape routes were blocked and success probability exceeded 95%. Now it was October 16th. Assets were in position. Drones overhead. Snipers at distant vantage points. The 3 informants had all reported consistent information. The algorithm gave the final probability. 94% chance Sinwar was in a specific building cluster, but probability wasn't certainty. They needed him above ground, in the open. Confirmed. At 3:47 p.m., thermal imaging detected movement. 3 signatures emerging from a tunnel entrance. They matched the profile. Same pattern, same security formation. Analysts watched, waited. The signatures moved through rubble, heading west, toward the open area where observation would be clearest. At 4:02 p.m., visual confirmation came. A drone at high altitude, equipped with cameras powerful enough to read a license plate from 20,000 feet. The image was grainy, but clear enough. 3 men, walking through ruins, one in the center. Dusty civilian clothes, but the posture, the gait, the way the other 2 flanked him. Everything matched. Facial recognition ran. Compared the image to every known photo of Yahya Sinwar. Factored in age, weight changes, stress. The algorithm processed it in 4.3 seconds. Match probability, 96.7%. It was him. Before we go further, drop your answer in the comments. If you were the analyst who had to make the final call, knowing one mistake could kill the wrong person, or let him escape again, would you authorize the strike at 96.7% certainty, or would you wait for 100%? The decision window was closing. Sinwar and his bodyguards were moving. In 3 minutes, they'd reach an area with more civilians. In 5 minutes, they could disappear back underground. In Tel Aviv, a commander looked at the probability score, at the civilian count in the area, at the weather conditions, at the escape routes, at everything that could go wrong. He had 30 seconds to decide, authorize the strike now, or let Sinwar slip away again, maybe for months, maybe forever. The cursor hovered over the authorization button. One click. That's all it would take. He clicked authorize. The command traveled through encrypted channels, from Tel Aviv to a forward base near the Gaza border, from there to a drone operator sitting in a climate-controlled room, from the operator's station to the drone itself, circling at 18,000 feet. The weapon armed, the targeting computer locked. Coordinates. The timer started counting down from 10. What Sinwar couldn't see were the crosshairs centered on his chest. What he couldn't hear was the high-pitched whine of the missile releasing from its mount. What he didn't know was that he had 9 seconds left to live. He kept walking, casual, unhurried, just another person moving through the ruins. His bodyguard on the left scanned windows. The one on the right watched the street behind them. Standard security protocol. They had done this 1,000 times. 8 seconds. Sinwar stepped over a pile of broken concrete. His boot caught slightly. He steadied himself, kept moving. 50 meters ahead was a partially collapsed building. That's where they were heading. 3 floors still standing. Basement entrance to the tunnels, safe. 7 seconds. The missile descended, supersonic, silent until the final moment. Guidance systems made micro adjustments, compensating for wind, for Sinwar's movement, for the fractional delay in satellite data. 6 seconds. One of the bodyguards stopped, looked up, not at the drone. He couldn't see that, but at something. Maybe a bird, maybe instinct. He said something to Sinwar. Sinwar didn't stop walking. 5 seconds. In Tel Aviv, analysts held their breath. The shot was clean. No civilians in the blast radius. Clear line of sight. Probability of success, 97.2%. But probability wasn't certainty. Missiles malfunction. Guidance systems glitch. Targets move at the wrong moment. 4 seconds. What none of them knew was that at that exact moment, 200 meters away, a child was riding a bicycle toward the same intersection. A girl, maybe 9 years old, wearing a pink jacket, pedaling fast because it was getting dark and her mother had told her to be home before sunset. 3 seconds. The drone operator saw her on his secondary feed. He froze. His hand moved toward the abort button. But abort protocols required commander authorization, and that would take 15 seconds. A minimum. The missile would impact in 3. 2 seconds. He made a choice. A split-second calculation that would haunt him forever. The girl's trajectory. The blast radius. The angle of the building. She would miss the kill zone by 20 meters. Probably, maybe, 1 second. Sinwar heard it. The last sound he'd ever hear. A screaming whistle cutting through the air. He turned his head toward the noise. His brain had just enough time to process what it meant. Then the world turned white. The explosion was precise, surgical. Exactly 2.4 meters above Sinwar's position when the missile struck. The blast wave radiated outward in a calculated pattern, maximum force downward, minimal lateral spread, designed to kill the target and nothing else. Sinwar was dead before the sound reached his ears. The bodyguard on his left died instantly. The one on the right lived for 7 more seconds, conscious but unable to move. His lungs collapsed from overpressure. The girl on the bicycle felt the shockwave hit her like a wall. It knocked her sideways, bike and rider tumbling across broken asphalt. But alive, 32 meters from the impact point, outside the lethal radius. Exactly as the operator had calculated. She would live. She would have nightmares for years, but she would live. In Tel Aviv, confirmation came through in stages. First, thermal imaging. 3 heat signatures before the strike, 0 after, then visual, smoke clearing, crater where Sinwar had been standing, body parts scattered, not enough left to run facial recognition. But they had the before images, verified to 96.7% confidence, and the after. 3 men entering the kill zone, 0 leaving. Mathematics demanded a conclusion. Still, they needed proof, real proof, because killing the wrong person would be catastrophic, politically, morally, strategically. Ground teams were dispatched, Israeli special forces, fast insertion, secure the site, collect DNA samples, confirm the kill, extract before Hamas. Reinforcements arrived. The problem was timing. The strike happened at 4:11 p.m. Hamas would know about it within minutes. They'd send fighters to secure the area, to remove any evidence, to either confirm or deny Sinwar's death, depending on what served them better. Israeli forces had maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20 if they were lucky. A helicopter lifted off from a base just across the border. 8 operators, combat medics, forensic specialists. They flew low and fast, hugging the terrain, using the same routes they had practiced in simulation dozens of times. At 4:23 p.m., they landed 3 blocks from the strike site. Boots hit ground, the operators moved in a practice formation, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats. What they found was chaos. Civilians emerging from buildings, some screaming, some silent with shock. A few already picking through the debris. Not because they cared about Sinwar, because in Gaza, even blast sites had salvageable metal, sellable fragments. Anything that could be traded for food. The team secured a perimeter, pushed civilians back, not roughly, but firmly. They had a job to do and a clock ticking down. The forensic specialist moved to the crater. She'd done this before. Identified remains from drone strikes, from suicide bombings, from mass graves. This was cleaner than most. The precision of the weapon meant the bodies hadn't been scattered across 100 meters. They were contained, mostly. She found what she needed in 90 seconds. Tissue samples, bone fragments, a section of skull with teeth still attached. Enough for DNA analysis, enough for positive identification. She bagged everything, marked it, sealed it. The whole process took 4 minutes. At 4:29 p.m., the team began extraction. They had been on site for 6 minutes. Standard protocol called for maximum 10 minutes in hostile territory. They were cutting it close. As they moved back toward the helicopter, they heard it, the distinct sound of vehicles, approaching. Fast. Multiple engines. Hamas reinforcements. The team leader made a call, hold position or run. If they ran and got caught in the open, they'd be exposed. If they held position, they'd be outnumbered and surrounded. He chose option 3. He radioed for air support, a second drone, already on station, already watching, armed and ready. The Hamas vehicles rounded a corner, 3 of them. Pickup trucks with mounted weapons, fighters standing in the beds. Maybe 15 men total. What they didn't know was that they were already being tracked, already targeted, already dead if they made the wrong move. The Israeli team held position, weapons raised but not firing, waiting. The geometry was simple. If Hamas opened fire first, the drone would eliminate them. If they didn't, the Israelis would try to extract without engagement. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. Hamas fighters staring at Israeli operators staring back. The distance between them, maybe 50 meters, close enough to see faces, close enough to see fear. Then one of the Hamas fighters lowered his weapon, said something to the others. They lowered theirs too. Slowly, not surrendering, just not escalating. The Israeli team backed away, step by step, covering each other, moving toward the helicopter. The Hamas fighters watched but didn't follow. At 4:34 p.m., the helicopter lifted off. The samples were secure, the operators were safe. The mission was complete, but the identification would take time. DNA analysis and field conditions could give preliminary results in hours. Absolute confirmation would take days. Back in Tel Aviv, analysts began processing everything. The before images, the after images, the thermal data. They built a timeline, matched it against known intelligence, cross-referenced every detail. By 6:00 p.m., they had preliminary confidence. The man in the center matched Sinwar's profile. Height, build, movement pattern. The probability score held at 96.7%. But probability wasn't proof. They needed the DNA results. The samples arrived at a secure laboratory at 7:15 p.m. Technicians began processing immediately. They had comparison DNA from Sinwar's previous imprisonment, hair samples, skin cells, collected years ago and stored specifically for this purpose. The first test completed at 11:43 p.m. Positive match on 3 markers, confidence level 87%. The second test completed at 2:17 a.m. Positive match on 7 markers, confidence level 95%. The third and final test completed at 6:04 a.m. on October 17th. Positive match on 13 markers. Confidence level 99.8%. Yahya Sinwar was dead, confirmed, verified, final. But here's what nobody expected. When they released the news, Hamas didn't deny it. They could have claimed it was propaganda, could have said Israel killed the wrong person, could have released an audio message from Sinwar proving he was alive. They didn't. They confirmed it within hours, released statements calling him a martyr, a hero, a leader who died fighting. Why? Because denying it would mean admitting he'd been hiding in tunnels while Gaza burned, admitting he'd valued his own life over his people, admitting he was a coward. Better to claim he died in combat. Better to turn his death into propaganda. Better to use it as recruitment material for the next generation of fighters. What they didn't mention was the intelligence failure, how Israel had penetrated their security so deeply, how informants had been feeding information for months, how Sinwar's own paranoia about technology had made him predictable in different ways. They didn't mention that 3 Hamas commanders had been killed in the previous month, that the organization's command structure was collapsing, that Israeli intelligence knew more about their operations than many Hamas members did. They claimed victory in death because it was the only card they had left to play. In Israel, the reaction was complex: relief that the mastermind was dead, grief that it couldn't bring back the murdered, anger that it took 13 months, fear about what comes next. Some families of October 7th, victims felt vindicated, justice served. Others felt empty. Because killing Sinwar didn't free the hostages, didn't rebuild destroyed communities, didn't erase the trauma. Politicians claimed success. Intelligence services stayed silent. They couldn't reveal methods, couldn't expose sources, couldn't explain how deeply they had infiltrated Gaza. Because those networks were still active, those informants still reporting, and there were other targets, other commanders, other operations already in progress. What the public saw was a drone strike, clean, precise, successful. What they didn't see was the 13 months of preparation, the hundreds of analysts, the millions spent on surveillance, the risks taken by Palestinians who fed information, knowing discovery meant death. The algorithm that processed 1 billion data points to produce one. Probability score. The operator who made a split-second choice about a girl on a bicycle. The forensic specialist who identified remains in a blast crater while under threat. They didn't see the machinery, just the result. And that's exactly how Mossad wanted it. Because visible intelligence work is failed intelligence work. Success means the target dies and the methods stay hidden. The network stays intact. The sources stay protected. The next operation stays possible. But there was a cost beyond the obvious. The 3 informants who helped track Sinwar, their usefulness was now limited. Hamas would conduct investigations, interrogations. They'd try to find the leaks. People would be tortured, killed, some guilty, some innocent. Mossad had protocols for this, extraction plans, safe houses in Egypt, new identities. But extraction only works if the person survives long enough to be extracted. 2 of the 3 made it out. Smuggled across the border through tunnels that Israeli intelligence now controlled, given new names, new lives, money, protection. The 3rd didn't make it. He was identified through security footage that Hamas recovered, a camera he didn't know existed, captured him in a location he shouldn't have been, asking questions he shouldn't have asked. He was executed 3 days after Sinwar's death. Quick, bullet to the head. Hamas claimed he was an Israeli spy. They weren't wrong. His family never knew. They thought he died in an airstrike. Random, collateral, just another victim of the war. Mossad added his name to a list, the list of assets killed in the line of duty, the list that only a handful of people would ever see. Here's a question that matters. That man died helping kill Sinwar, knowing Hamas would hunt for informants. Was his sacrifice heroic resistance against Hamas, or was he just a pawn used by a foreign intelligence service? Drop your perspective in the comments, because here's the truth about intelligence work. It's not clean. It's not heroic. It's using people, manipulating fear, exploiting desperation, promising protection that might not come, paying for information that might be lies, building trust that might be betrayed, and the people who do it sleep fine, because they've made the calculation. One informant's life versus hundreds of potential victims. One civilian death versus stopping the next massacre. one moral compromise versus mission failure. They've made peace with being the ones who do what others can't stomach, the ones who work in shadows so others can live in light. And on October 16, 2024, at 4:11 p.m., that calculation produced a crater in Gaza where Yahya Sinwar used to be standing. The operation was complete. The target was dead. The intelligence network stayed hidden. The next mission was already being planned. But Sinwar's death wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something else, something nobody saw coming. Within 48 hours of the strike, Mossad intercepted communications from 12 different Hamas commanders, all discussing the same thing. Not revenge, not retaliation. Succession. Who would lead now? Who had the legitimacy? Who controlled which resources? What they didn't know was that every message was being recorded. Every power struggle was being mapped. Every fracture in the organization was being documented for future exploitation. Israeli intelligence had learned something crucial from hunting Sinwar. The best time to strike an organization isn't when it's strong and unified. It's immediately after you cut off the head, when everyone's fighting for control, when paranoia runs highest, when trust collapses. So, they struck again, and again, and again. On October 19th, a Hamas weapons coordinator died in a car explosion in Khan Yunis. The blast was small, contained. Witnesses said the car just erupted from inside. No missile, no drone, just fire and metal. What witnesses didn't see was the device planted 3 days earlier, magnetic, attached to the underside of the chassis, triggered remotely when the target was alone and the street was clear. On October 23rd, a senior commander in northern Gaza died in his sleep. Heart attack. That's what the death certificate said. Natural causes. Stress of war. He was 57. Overweight. Diabetic. Not suspicious. What the autopsy didn't find was the poison, administered through his insulin supply, swapped out by someone with access to his medical supplies. Someone paid. Someone desperate. Someone who made a choice between collaboration and watching his own children starve. The poison was sophisticated, mimicked a cardiac event perfectly, broke down in the body within hours, left no trace. The kind of thing that takes a laboratory to create and a ghost to deliver. On October 28th, 3 commanders were killed in a coordinated strike. Different locations, different methods, same minute. The precision sent a message. We can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. Hamas tried to adapt, changed communication protocols, stopped using couriers, moved commanders deeper underground, increased security, became more paranoid about informants. But paranoia is a weapon too. When you can't trust anyone, you can't coordinate, can't plan, can't operate effectively. Organizations eat themselves from the inside. By November, Hamas was conducting internal purges, executing suspected informants, sometimes based on evidence, often based on suspicion, fear, rivalry. What they didn't realize was that the purges were making recruitment easier for Israeli intelligence, because every executed innocent created a family with a grievance. Every tortured suspect created a potential source. Every act of internal brutality created motivation to flip. Mossad didn't just watch this happen, they accelerated it. Planted false information that made commanders suspicious of each other. Sent anonymous tips about collaboration that weren't true. Created chaos and then offered desperate people a way out. It's called black propaganda. Information designed not to inform, but to destroy. To make enemies fight each other instead of you. To turn an organization into a circular firing squad. And it was working. By mid-November, Hamas was bleeding commanders faster than they could replace them. Not all from Israeli strikes. Some from internal executions. Some from defections. Some just disappeared, neither dead nor captured, just gone. The Israeli public saw drone strikes and military operations. What they didn't see was the invisible war, the one fought with information and fear and manipulation. The one where the enemy destroys itself and thinks it's being careful. But there was a cost. There's always a cost. Every informant recruited is a human being, with family, with reasons, with doubts. Some cooperate because they genuinely want Hamas gone. Some because they need money. Some because they were threatened. Some because they have no choice left. And when operations go wrong, informants die, not just the guilty. Sometimes their families, sometimes their neighbors. Sometimes random people in the wrong place who get swept up in Hamas investigations. Intelligence services call it acceptable losses, the price of the mission, the calculation that says one informant's life is worth the intelligence they provide. But the informant doesn't see it that way. Neither does his wife, or his children, or the people who trusted him and died because of that trust. In December, Mossad lost an entire network in central Gaza. 7 people, all connected, all feeding information, all compromised when one got caught and talked under torture. Hamas executed them publicly, made a show of it, called them traitors, collaborators, said they'd sold Palestinian blood for Israeli money. What Hamas didn't mention was that 2 of the 7 weren't informants at all. They just knew someone who was. Guilt by association. Their crime was being in the wrong family. One was a teacher. She'd never spoken to an Israeli in her life, never passed information, never took money. She was executed because her brother had. Her students watched. They were forced to watch. Hamas wanted them to see what happened to traitors. What they actually saw was a teacher who'd helped them learn to read getting shot in the head while she begged for her children. That image does something to people. Some, it radicalizes, convinces them Hamas is right and Israel is evil. Others it breaks, makes them hate everyone. The Israelis who used her brother, the Hamas who killed her. The whole machinery that grinds lives into dust. And a few, a very few, it motivates differently, makes them decide that maybe the enemy of their enemy is worth talking to, worth risking everything to help destroy. That teacher's death created 3 new informants, people who knew her, who saw it happen, who decided Hamas had to be stopped at any cost. Mossad didn't plan that. They didn't want her to die. But when she did, they used it, recruited the people her death motivated, put them into the network, kept the intelligence flowing. That's the calculus. That's the machinery. Every death is analyzed for exploitation value. Every tragedy is assessed for recruitment potential. Every human cost is weighed against operational gain. The people doing this aren't monsters. They're professionals. They've made peace with what they do because the alternative is worse. Because October 7th happened. Because hostages are still underground. Because if they don't do this, someone else gets massacred. But making peace with it doesn't make it clean. By January 2025, the operation had grown beyond Gaza. Israeli intelligence had identified Hamas financial networks in Qatar, in Turkey, in Lebanon, money flowing from donors to operations, millions moving through shell companies and cryptocurrency and informal banking systems. They didn't just track it, they disrupted it, froze accounts, intercepted transfers, fed information to friendly governments who could apply pressure, made it harder for Hamas to pay fighters, to buy weapons, to maintain the infrastructure of resistance. Some of those disruptions were legal, some weren't. Some involved cyber operations that violated international law. Some involved threats against bankers who were just doing their jobs. Some involved making people disappear who knew too much. None of it made the news. None of it will ever be publicly acknowledged. Because successful intelligence work stays invisible. But the effects were real. By late January, Hamas fighters in Gaza were going months without pay. Weapons shipments were being intercepted. Tunnel construction had slowed because they couldn't afford materials. The organization was being systematically choked, and all of it traced back to October 16th, to that crater in Rafah, to Yahya Sinwar's death. Because killing him wasn't just about revenge, it was about decapitation, removing the one leader who could hold the organization together, creating chaos, then exploiting that chaos until the entire structure collapsed. Israel's stated goal was to destroy Hamas' military capability. The unstated goal was to make Hamas destroy itself, to create conditions where being a Hamas commander was a death sentence, where recruitment dried up because nobody wanted to be the next target, where the cost of resistance became too high. Did it work? That's complicated. Hamas still exists, still fights, still claims to represent Palestinian resistance, but it's fractured, weakened. Bleeding leaders and money and popular support. Some Palestinians see that as Israeli victory. Others see it as creating a vacuum that something worse might fill. Because destroying an organization doesn't destroy the conditions that created it. The occupation still exists. The blockade still exists. the settlements still expand. The fundamental grievances that motivated October 7th haven't changed. So, intelligence services can hunt commanders, can disrupt networks, can kill targets with surgical precision. But can they kill an idea? Can they drone strike frustration? Can they infiltrate hopelessness? Those are questions nobody's answering because they're political, moral, complicated. And intelligence services don't do complicated. They do measurable, quantifiable, target eliminated, mission accomplished. Meanwhile, the invisible war continues. Right now, there are informants in Gaza reporting to Israeli handlers they've never met. There are Hamas commanders being tracked by satellites they can't see. There are operations being planned that won't be executed for months. There are algorithms processing movement patterns, facial recognition scanning every checkpoint, financial investigators tracking money flows, cyber operations mapping network vulnerabilities. And there are people making calculations. How much collateral damage is acceptable? Which informant is worth extracting? Whether the intelligence justifies the risk? Whether killing one commander is worth exposing a network? These decisions happen in quiet rooms, made by people the public will never know, based on information that will never be declassified, with consequences that ripple across years. Sinwar's death was one operation, one strike, one confirmed kill, but it triggered hundreds of other operations, created opportunities that are still being exploited, shifted dynamics that are still playing out. The people who planned it know this. They measure success not in headlines, but in intelligence reports, not in public opinion, but in operational outcomes, not in what people see, but in what remains hidden. And they sleep at night because they've made peace with the cost, because someone has to do this work, because the alternative is letting the next Sinwar plan the next October 7th, because protecting civilians sometimes means using them, because saving lives sometimes means taking them. That's modern intelligence, warfare, not clean, not heroic, not something you celebrate, just necessary, brutal, effective, and absolutely invisible until the moment a missile finds its target. What Sinwar didn't know in his final seconds was that his death had been engineered for months, that his movements had been tracked, that his security had been penetrated, that his own paranoia had made him predictable. What the public doesn't know is how deep the operation went. How many people died to make it possible? How many moral lines were crossed? How much of the invisible machinery still runs in the shadows? They see the strike, they don't see the system. And that's exactly the point, because the day intelligence work becomes visible is the day it stops working. So here's what happens next. The networks stay active, the satellites keep watching, the informants keep reporting, the analysts keep building models, the operators keep weapons armed and ready. Because there's always another target, always another threat, always another operation that might prevent the next massacre or might create the next grievance that fuels the one after that. It's a cycle. Hunt the hunter, kill the killer, create the conditions that create the next target. Repeat until everyone's dead or everyone's exhausted or something fundamental changes. Sinwar understood this. In his final audio message, recorded weeks before his death, he said something interesting. He said the fight wasn't about winning. It was about making victory so costly that eventually the other side would give up. He was right about the cost, wrong about who would give up first. On October 16, 2024, at 4:11 p.m., the machinery proved it could reach anyone, find anyone, kill anyone, with precision, with patience, with cold mathematical certainty. That's the message that echoed across the region, not just to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to Iran, to every group that thought they could plan attacks and hide in tunnels and stay invisible. The message was simple. We can see you, we can track you, we can wait years if necessary, but eventually you'll make a mistake, and when you do, we'll be watching. That's what modern espionage looks like. Not James Bond, not Hollywood, just satellites and informants and algorithms and people making terrible choices in quiet rooms. Choices that save lives, choices that cost lives, choices that shape conflicts, that shape history, that shape the next generation's grievances. And the machinery keeps turning. In Tel Aviv, in Gaza, in Beirut and Tehran and Damascus. Invisible, relentless. Waiting for the next pattern to emerge. the next probability score to hit 95%, the next target to make the final mistake. Yahya Sinwar's crater has been filled in. New buildings will eventually rise, new people will walk that street. The physical evidence has disappeared, but the invisible evidence remains, in classified files, in algorithm improvements, in lessons learned, in networks that stayed intact, in methods that worked, in precedents that will shape future operations. That's the real legacy, not the death, the system that enabled it, the machinery that will keep running long after everyone forgets his name. Because that's the question nobody's answering, the question that haunts the operators and the analysts and the people who authorize the strike, the question that will define how future wars are fought, not with armies, with information, with precision, with invisible networks and patient calculations, and people dying without ever seeing who killed them. That's what killed Yahya Sinwar. That's what's still hunting in the shadows. That's what modern warfare has become. And somewhere right now, an algorithm is processing data. An informant is sending a message. An analyst is building a probability score. An operator is watching a screen, waiting for the pattern, waiting for the moment, waiting for the next target to make the mistake that turns them from invisible to dead. The hunt never stops. The machinery never sleeps. The invisible war never ends. It just finds new targets.